So a lot of booktubers do a monthly wrap up and they're like, yep, March was a pretty good month for me. Whereas a monthly wrap up for me would be like... So for now, I think I'm going to do 3 monthly wrap ups. That suits my pace better. And so this is the first from January to March with a bit of December in there as well. My reading taste is pretty eclectic. I do tend towards sci-fi fantasy, but there's all sorts of stuff in here, so feel free to skip ahead if you're not interested in one of these reviews. First up, we have a Terry Brooks book called Straken. This is the 3rd book of a series called The High Druid of Shannara. This is kind of the 4th series of Shannara books. I think Shannara gets a bad rap. You can go and check out Mike's book reviews. He did a great video about the legacy of Shannara. This one was a pretty good series. I didn't like the 3rd series so much. This one just seemed to be much better plotted. The 2nd book ends on about 7 different cliffhangers, so that was pretty cool to go into this 3rd one to find out what happens. Yeah, I gave this series 4 stars overall. I thought it was pretty good. There's a cool new area of the world that gets explored. I'm always interested in exploration and maps. Speaking of maps, it's a crime against humanity that this book has no map in it. The middle book has this horrible reproduced, can't see anything kind of map. And again, the 1st book doesn't even have a map in it. What's worse is there's actually a 2nd map for these books, which is, if you know the world of Shannara, there's the Forbidding. So one of the characters goes to the Forbidding, and there is a map for that. You can look for it online, and obviously it's in maybe the hardcovers, but it's not anywhere in these books, which is ridiculous. That map is pretty cool. I'd probably give it about a 3 out of 5. It's a cool map, but in terms of where the character goes on the map, it kind of doesn't necessarily make much sense if you're looking at the map and reading the book. So sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So I give the map 3 out of 5. That's The High Druid of Shannara, Straken, 3rd book. 2nd book, Restaurant at the End of the Universe. If you don't know what Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is, what are you doing here? This is a reread for me. I read it about probably 30 years ago. Excellent series, very funny. Still holds up after all this time. So I listened to the original radio series when it first came out in the 80s and have listened to it a couple of times. So when I'm reading this, I can actually tell the bits that are verbatim from the radio play, and then there's the extra bits which he adds, which I think he does a good job of using the book medium. Towards the end of the book, there's a bit of a slow, boring bit with Arthur and Ford in prehistoric Earth, which just seemed a bit like Douglas Adams was just trying to get the book finished. But anyway, fantastic book series. If you love Discworld, you should definitely give this. It's like the sci-fi equivalent of fantasy humor. It's like the sci-fi equivalent of the Discworld series. Next up, we have Eye of the World, Wheel of Time, Book 1. You can look at my video about that and comparing it to the TV series. I'm finally diving in, reading the entire Wheel of Time series, not stopping this time. So looking forward to the next one. Next book, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Book 8. After reading Eye of the World, it was time for a bit of a light palate cleanser. I do read kids' books. C.S. Lewis has some great quotes on children's books. One is, "A children's story that can only be enjoyed by children is not a good children's story in the slightest." I actually really like Diary of a Wimpy Kid. They are very funny. Probably the funniest part for me in this one was Greg, the Wimpy Kid. He finds a hidden stash of books in his mother's closet, which are parenting self-help books, because she doesn't want to let on any of the tricks that she's learnt how to parent. Next up, we have The Oracle by Jonathan Cahn. This guy is a Messianic Jew. So if you don't know what that means, it means basically a Jew that's a Christian who believes Jesus was the Messiah. This book has a rice paper thin plot device. It's kind of non-fiction, but kind of fiction. It has a lot of information about the creation of the State of Israel and a bit of that history over the last 200 years. There's a lot of kind of 50-year coincidences. A lot of it yeah, some of it, yeah, it's kind of interesting. Some of it is very reaching. It's like, let's grab this point and this point and this point. Hey, look at that coincidence. That's amazing. You know, it's yeah, it's a little bit iffy. But again, I'm happy I read it. It was interesting, but it could probably be compressed into about half the size. Next up we have The Island by Peter Watts. This is a short story, well, it's 76 pages. It was, I think, recommended on Hacker News. It had some great ideas, very out there kind of sci-fi, which is very cool. I just thought the execution could have been better. I think my comment on Goodreads was that if Asimov had done this, he would have done it better and in about a quarter of the pages. Worth a read. I haven't read anything else by him, but I'm not sad that I read it. Yeah, just wasn't that exciting for me. Raise the Titanic by Clive Cussler. Clive Cussler, if you're not aware, is kind of like a precursor to Dan Brown, that kind of thing. So this is written in the 70s before they even knew where the Titanic was. They hadn't discovered it on the floor of the ocean yet. So this is a bit of a kind of silly action adventure story about going and basically they raise up the Titanic, which is kind of ridiculous. But yeah, I don't mind these books. They're quite fun. This one was a bit disjointed in parts. The main character kind of doesn't come in for about the first 100 pages. Yeah, there's a bit of, 1970s sexism going on there, but it was a fun read. Introducing the Bible by William Barclay. A very thin, short book with a not very exciting cover, but a great book. Apparently there's a 25th anniversary edition with updated information. That very ambiguous title is basically talking about how the Bible came to be. Talks about the Old Testament and how the various books came to be canonized, and likewise for the New Testament, how those books kind of got collected and canonized. And another section about the Apocrypha, basically the parts of the Old Testament that don't have any Hebrew manuscripts. The history of how that was kind of less and less included in modern Bibles. Great little book, highly recommended. Last book, Biggles in the Cruise of the Condor by Captain W.E. Johns. Now this was written in the 20s. If you don't know who this is, he was a fighter pilot in World War I and he went on to write a zillion of these books. I think there's like basically 100 of these books. And so the joke goes, one of them's called Biggles Ties His Shoelace. Anyway, this is the second book and actually the first full-length novel. The first one was a bunch of short stories. This is very Indiana Jones. It's like, when I was reading it, I was thinking, wait a second, did George Lucas and Steven Spielberg actually read these and steal some of the ideas? It was a great book. Just a lot of fun, just silly adventure. Some racist stuff in there, so just be aware of that if you're going to read this to your kid. But highly recommended. If you've never read a Biggles, you should give them a shot. One more thing, I read a few Dragon magazines from 1979. This is part of my blog, dndchronologically.com, link in the show notes. Where I am reading through everything that TSR published from the beginning of Dungeons & Dragons in 1974. So this is just continuing it. I'm up to 1979. Lastly, I'm halfway through A Beautifully Foolish Endeavour by Hank Green. So far enjoying it. I'll give an update in my next video. So that's my wrap up for January to March of 2023. Let me know what you think in the comments and I will see you in the next one.